Welcome back to What Do You Know with Nick and Devin. I'm Nick.
I'm Devin.
Are you okay?
I was stretching.
Getting a little old?
Yeah, very. I'm turning 31 next month, okay?
Let's compare our grays. Yikes. All right. So,
Yeah.
my last episode, not last week, but the week before that, the beginnings of Gay Wrath Month.
Right.
We talked about a few events that were kind of catalysts and steps along the way to kind of precursor the Stonewall in riots or uprising or rebellion, whatever you want to call it.
Now I remember.
You remember.
Thanks for catching me back up.
Anytime.
And Milwaukee, pretty cool. Surprisingly,
Pretty
good
cool
ally.
place. Yep. So we're going to jump into a little bit, two more of those, just to kind of like bring us along in some kind of hidden and rediscovered history of the kind of queer community. I will say, kind of, tangential note, I think that we say like gay liberation movement and like we kind of in the beginnings, and especially around the 60s and when everything was happening, everything kind of was under like homophile or homosexual or like gay and lesbian. And there was the aspect of course, like transgender and all of that. But like it really was kind of sectioned out. I feel like these, like now we kind of have a kind of queer umbrella that we pull everything into. So I interchange the terms, but just like as I kind of talk about like, the gay community, most often I'll kind of include everyone into that, kind of synonymous with the queer community. It lends itself more to the time when we're talking about it, or it might be a quote from the time. So just as like a caveat, if people are like, the gay community, like there's only like gay men, and it's like, not necessarily.
No, yeah, I get what you're saying. I feel like there's a much broader light being cast onto the queer community to highlight those of all the other sexualities out there.
Right.
Along the spectrum and whatnot. But I think back then, it was a much more narrow focused flashlight onto these folks.
100%. Well, one, I mean, you didn't even have the idea of all of these different spectrums of what this community can be, and so they really just focused in on the most popular and like what they knew. Yeah. Right. Like we'll get into it, and like trans people were actually more so described as just drag queens. Right. And of course transvestites. And then of course we've shifted that mentality, but like even then it just wasn't thought of to be like, you're someone who, you know what I mean, is trans. No, you're just a drag queen. Yeah. Like, so anyway, so I just wanted to make that like little caveat in case anyone kind of pulls that out, but I hope everyone knows that like we're just talking about, like, we'll be specific when we need to be specific, but like overall, a lot of this is happening to the community as a whole. Right. Yep. Okay. You ready?
Yeah, I think so.
What do you know?
Yeah, I'm
Check
good.
your pockets.
Yeah, I'm good.
Funky wallet. Yeah. What do you know about the Black Cat Tavern protest?
Nothing. I'm stuck on Spider-Man character. Black Cat. Sorry.
It's a Spider-Man character?
Oh yeah, Black Cat. Felicia Hardy. No,
I believe
she's
you.
A cat burglar. Who's kind of like I think Catwoman. Where sure. Like is a villain, quote unquote, but like helps out Spider-Man a lot. And like they bone.
After Gwen Stacy? Or is it Gwen Stacy then Mary Jane?
It depends on like the timeline and universe.
Oh,
so I won't get into that. But.
Got it. Okay, heard. Who do you like better, Gwen Stacy or Mary Jane?
Felicia Hardy. Kidding me? She's in a tight black leather outfit. Let's go.
Let's go. Heard. All right. So the Black Cat Tavern protest. So
know nothing about it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I feel like it felt rhetorical, but I did want to hear. Yeah.
I appreciate you giving me a chance.
Right. Just
Let's
in case.
Go on.
So there are two dates set here.
Sure.
So January 1st, 1967 is kind of the incident that occurs. And then February 11th, 1967 is the protest aspect of it that happens.
Okay.
So we'll go over both. We'll also go into, of course, context into a lot of this, especially because the last episode we went into Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and New York, and now we're shifting to the West Coast and we're in LA.
Cool.
So we'll be in Silver Lake, the Silver Lake neighborhood of LA.
Okay.
It was actually, the Black Cat Tavern was established in November of 1966. So only 2 months later did the incident occur.
Oops.
Yep.
Okay.
Surprise. So what started as police brutality, naturally, ended as one of the largest documented LGBTQ civil rights demonstrations in the nation at the time.
Oh.
So good out of bad, but still not great. So let's talk about Los Angeles in the 60s.
Sure.
So at the time, being gay was still criminal, whether it was lewd and indecent acts such as kissing, because sodomy laws were still in place. Across the nation. While gay bars were a safe haven for the gay community, they still often faced legal consequences for serving gays, such as losing their liquor and possible business license, as we saw in previous events as well. That kind of ran rampant, of course, across the nation,
country,
right?
Yeah.
So police raids were commonplace, and gay bars even had code words for when plainclothes police officers entered. So if they were like, spotted pig, they would do a little sign or they would say something, or I couldn't find the code word, so make one up
for a good reason.
Touche. So LA also made it illegal for a person's gender presentation not to match the sex shown on their ID. So again, those gender affirming laws, right? So this was obviously used as a target towards transgender people or cross-dressing bar patrons. This is why many gay bars were hostile towards transgender patrons, banning or discouraging them from entering. So in the queer community, even still today, there's a lot of internal strife and struggle, right? There are people that, there's the trope of like gays don't like lesbians, and of course, like everyone doesn't like transgendered people and things of that nature.
Bisexual people don't exist.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
I think that some of that, unfortunately, is still true. But I think it's interesting to start to find where that stemmed from, right? Like, why did that happen? And the gay and lesbian thing is interesting, especially when lesbians were really there for gay men during the AIDS epidemic.
Yeah.
But for trans people, I think this is kind of that linkage, right? That what happened is police raided bars, especially to find acts against gender conforming laws, right? And oftentimes that was trans people that fell into being arrested for those bars or for those crimes.
Right.
And then, of course, police raids thus continued, right? And so gay men were like, I just want to hang out here. But like their mentality was, if a trans person enters the bar, that has a better like presentation to the police to allow them to come into the bar. Does that make sense?
It's giving the cops more reasonable what's the word I'm thinking of?
Like probable cause?
Probable cause. Yeah, it's essentially giving them a higher probable cause to raid the bar.
Right.
Because they can see it and they'll be like, oh, there's probably others.
Right. Because let's say like, unfortunately, right, I'm a police officer, I enter the bar.
Yeah.
Code word is said, whatever, right? As gay men, we could just be like, oh, just, chill with your drink, maybe have a conversation, what have you, so long as we're not having
Put my hands to myself.
Right. Lewd or disorderly conduct or kissing or anything like that, right? But then you have a trans person enter the bar or is in the bar, and now the police are like, hey, let me see your ID. Yeah. Let me see if your clothes match, right? That sort of thing. Now, I'm not saying, I do not condone that whatsoever. Of course. Gay men should have absolutely protected trans people at the time. We're all under the same, umbrella and facing the same kind of prejudice, especially during that time. And so but I think that that's where kind of that internal struggle today kind of still stems from.
Okay.
It's irrelevant because those laws no longer exist. However, I think that kind of mentality continued on, right? So again, not to condone actions by any means, but I think it's more so to kind of give context and understanding as to where that came from.
Right.
Yeah. So I just wanted to say that. That's all. So there was an incident that happened before we kind of enter into the 60s that I'm going to dive into. So this is not the Black Cat Tavern incident. This is a separate incident, but it kind of sparks some it kind of shows some tension between police and the trans community, police and the gay community within LA at the time. Okay. So on the cusp of the 60s in LA, there was also the Cooper's Donuts uprising. Disclaimer to this, there's only oral evidence of this event. So there was actually no like physical or things like that. There's just like oral evidence. There was this one guy that really kind of, I think, wrote a book about it or an article concerning it. And so there's been interviews, but there is no like, this happened this day. This is what, there's this news article, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I think there is like one news article that references this potential event.
Okay.
But I'm just disclaiming that while we know that a lot of marginalized people's history can often come from oral traditions, I just want to say that out there. So if people start looking it up, they're like, but this says there's no, I'm just disclaiming it and showing some context. Okay.
Sure.
So while the shop may not have been Cooper's, but just the fact that the donut shops were kind of known colloquially as Cooper's due to the amount of locations and popularity. So Cooper's Donuts was a chain and it was pretty popular in LA. And so people would, any donut shop or like cafe, people would be like, oh, meet me at Cooper's Donuts over on blah, blah, blah.
Cool.
Right?
Yeah.
I don't quite get that because like, I wouldn't be like, hey, meet me at the McDonald's. And then we go to like a burger joint. Like,
yeah, it's like calling every Pop Coke.
Right. It is very much that, but it's just like kind of weird.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
I want a donut now.
we pause, go get a donut, come back.
Camera cuts. We're eating donuts.
So it was located in the Skid Row. This location was located in the Skid Row neighborhood / the tight gay neighborhood known as The Run.
Okay.
Kind of a cool name.
Yeah. This was like the 60s?
This was 58, 59.
58, 59. Okay.
So the cafe was a 24-hour spot located right near two gay bars, Harold's and the Waldorf. So Cooper's was a popular spot for the gay community, and they were always served and welcomed there.
Got to get your donuts.
We love that.
Donuts for your donuts.
We're okay.
Okay.
So on an evening in May of 1959, two police officers entered the cafe and asked for IDs from several patrons. Noting the gender-conforming laws in place, the officers attempted to arrest two drag queens, two male sex workers, and a young man cruising for a date. When the officers began to arrest one of the patrons and wanted to force all five of them into the back of a squad car, they had enough and began to argue back.
Oh, okay.
Sure. The incident, this incited the patrons surrounding them, and the onlookers began throwing donuts, cups, coffee, trash at the police officers until the two police officers fled without making any arrests.
Oh, okay.
So while the officers are fleeing, the community erupted in celebration because, like, they're like, we finally like fucking fought back. We just like didn't take it anymore. You know what I mean?
We won something.
Correct. Like even as small as it might be or seem. So they erupted in celebration, and a larger crowd grew from the neighboring gay bars. Police backup eventually arrived, blocking off the street for the night, and subsequently beat and arrested several people.
Oh,
I mean, like, unfortunately, we knew it was going there, but.
I was hoping they blocked off the streets so we could have a fun little black party. Guess not. All right.
Surprise.
I'm just an optimist.
You really are shooting for it. Any silver lining we can find. So this event is often cited as the first gay uprising in the U.S. So that's where I'm like, it's cited in a lot of places.
Yeah.
And also there's not a lot of evidence. And so it's kind of like, it kind of goes back and forth. So again.
Especially for being like... marked as the first one, like why would this is I don't mean to this be offensive, but like why would anyone care, like
sure,
this is just like a one-off of those villainous queers, like why should we give them this attention kind of thing?
Sure. I mean,
until it becomes a bigger issue.
The media then is, I mean, I think also the police, and we see this in another event in a bit, but like the police are able to kind of have some media in the pocket, right? Yeah. So then the ones that are more sympathetic to the queer community are often like those underground, like newspapers and articles and things like that. So we could easily be
those like Pulp Fiction magazines. Yeah.
Right. Like, let's not, act on this or publish this or whatever it might be.
Right.
Yeah.
We're a little embarrassed.
We're a little shy, a little embarrassed. So the clash between the gay community and police continued from that point until 1965, when an unspoken truce was made between gay establishments and the police department.
Oh.
Could not find anything. but had found this in a couple of places where it was like there was kind of a truce for a couple of years between the police department and like not too many raids and things like that. Like very odd. Not sure where that came from.
I wonder if like there was just a new chief or something like that was like, hey, I'm cool,
sure,
a little bit more chill about this, but like I have to do some raids just to like appease the public.
Sure, yeah. Something.
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously just speculation. But
right. So I'm sure there is more. I just didn't deep dive. So if somebody knows, let us know. Throw it out there. So, however...
it gets worse.
I love this. However, with Reagan winning the California gubernatorial election in November of 1966 and looking to be sworn in January... his crackdown of a law and order philosophy began to swiftly permeate the police force. This gave a determined police extraordinary license to violently demonstrate.
This motherfucker ruins everything.
Literally everything.
I hate him.
Literally everything.
And if he's not rotting in hell right now, I have a problem with the big guy that might be up there.
Literally everything. Like,
okay.
Everything can kind of be traced back to this.
Yeah.
Because even others around him weren't as bold as he was in a lot of ways. And so it's just like again, it gives rise and attention to a minority, but then that becomes popularized. And then people start to like bring their attention in, right? It's like when we give... This is kind of a loose connection, but it's like when we give attention to a serial killer and then people create copycats. Like you just kind of like, you start to like build on this, like, because they're getting attention and they're getting fame and they're getting all these things and people are more attracted to that, but then they're attaching the way they got there to then also do that. Right?
Yeah.
You see the same thing with Reagan. You see the thing with Trump. Like it's that sort of mentality. Like some people might not have even been there. And I wouldn't go as far as to say like people have then become radicalized by it, but I think it's like just a part of people's want and desire to find something of their own and feel connected and feel a part of something.
Right.
Wild. So, again, this gave a determined police extraordinary license to violently demonstrate their commitment to enforcing the law. As a heavily stigmatized group, gay men were specifically chosen because they represented an easy target.
Okay.
So, that's a little bit of background into it, and kind of where we were in California at the time as well, right? Sure. So definitely Reagan giving more leeway and by any means necessary to enforce law and order.
Right.
So I can't do a good Reagan.
We talked about this.
Did we?
It
turns into Nixon.
Yeah.
Anyway, so New Year's Eve, 1967. This is the first incident we have here.
Sure.
For the Black Cat Tavern.
Heard.
So the Black Cat Tavern is packed and the energy is high.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. During all the excitement and partying, the bar was unprepared for the plainclothes officers amongst the crowd.
Fuck.
And the raid that was about to start.
Fuck.
Correct.
All right.
Which, this is super fucked up. This is super fucked up because they knew that going in on New Year's Eve, what do you always do at the stroke of midnight?
Oh, shit. That's so evil.
Right?
Wow.
Super sinister. So as the new year rang in and traditional celebratory kisses were shared, police officers immediately began to destroy the bar's decorations while they beat and arrested patrons and staff.
Whoa.
Like they knew. Like it was like a sting operations because they absolutely knew. But I was like, you just destroyed an entire like evening. Like that's insane. I mean, it really is like this malicious kind of sinister. Like the person that was like, you know how we can like fucking like beat and arrest a bunch of people at once? We should do it New Year's Eve. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
it's almost like planting evidence on the person.
Right. Like some sick fuck like thought of that and was like, oh, we gotta do this. Like,
jeez.
Exactly. So chaos ensued, and during the struggle/beatings, police officers were literally dragging patrons out of the bar and into the street. 2 of the bartenders were beaten unconscious. Some patrons made it out of the bar and ran to the other nearby gay bar, New Faces, to kind of warn them, right? But as they ran in, they were beaten and arrested by plainclothes officers waiting there.
Whoa.
So they were tactical. So they were like, Black Cat, they knew New Faces was there as well. we're going to put plainclothes officers in both, and then whether one runs to the other or we're going to do both at both places, like 100%. So the female owner of New Faces, Lee Roy, was mistaken for a man in drag, and that her name was actually Leroy.
Wow.
And was eventually hospitalized because she was beaten and arrested.
Jesus.
And a server at New Faces, Robert Haas, suffered cracked facial bones, severe bruising, and a ruptured spleen.
Ugh.
At the end of the night, 14 people were arrested between the bars. Haas was charged with felony assault of an officer.
What?
Exactly.
I'm sorry. I was beating you with my face that you were punching in.
Correct. Clearly, that is your fault. Duh.
Oh, silly me.
You broke my hand because I was beating you up. Duh.
He kept running into my fist so many times.
Right. He ran into my knife 10 times. That's exactly what that is.
Jesus.
So his case and several others were either acquitted, no contest with fines, or had their case dismissed. So that did happen. Still awful, but that happened. But 6 men were convicted of lewd conduct and were liable to register as sex offenders, which is, of course, a lifelong designation.
Sure is.
2 of the 6 were ultimately required to register, but tried to appeal. So 4 of them kind of got off, or it wasn't enforced, but 2 of them were forced to do it. So they tried to appeal it. Their attorney, Herbert E. Swillen, did not deny or cover up his client's sexual orientation, which was kind of novel at the time, but instead claimed their right to equal treatment under the 14th Amendment. And this is the first time we kind of see that play out in court. But this legal argument in the courts would not be accepted until decades later.
Yeah.
So the appeal went all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court, but the court refused to hear the case.
Huh.
That I did not know, and that's crazy. This is the first time we kind of see, instead of just deny, you weren't kissing anyone, people were mistaken, you were just there on a dare, you know what I mean, whatever.
Right.
But he was like, no, we're going for it.
Yeah,
Why not?
yeah.
You know. But unfortunately, they did not win, or it wasn't heard. Right. So not much media coverage was published due to the involvement of the queer community. So they were like, it's the queers. We don't have to talk about them. But the radical. I just love the term the queers. Anyway, but that should be a band. But the radical underground publication, the Los Angeles Free Press, were of course sympathetic to the victims of the raid. So the Tavern Guild Southern California, a coalition of gay-friendly bars, even affirmed that the victims of the raid were peaceful. They were everyone was peaceful. No one was getting crazy. The police, it was all the police, right? However, the County Courier published an article titled "Tavern Charges Police Brutality," quoted the area police commander claiming the bar patrons, quote, took violent exception, end quote, to the raid, and that the officer was kicked, quote, beaten, and stepped upon, and had to be hospitalized for 9 days. But there was no evidence of that.
Right. That's easily able to look that up.
Correct. But of course, the County Courier is more of a mainstream publication.
Right.
So they got to shift that.
Yeah.
Right. So because this was one of the only mainstream media outlets to cover the event, the police were successful in shifting the narrative away from brutal police beatings of innocent, happy partygoers to police being heroes who save society from a group of violent queers. So
love it.
Yep. So this is why you may find it as the Black Cat Riot.
Oh.
Because they incited something and the police came in and suppressed it and made sure everyone in the neighborhood was safe. That's why a lot of times, the Stonewall Inn riots, a lot of these things will kind of, shift the tone of the incident itself.
Right.
Right. So that happened January 1st, right?
Sure.
Now we shift into the peaceful protest and what came out of that, right? So while the strict law and order philosophy was ramping up, the queer community was determined to maintain the progress they had made. So they would not allow the police to start harassing them again. The LA gay community groups PRIDE, the Personal Rights in Defense and Education, and the SCCRH, Southern California Council on Religion and the Homophile, which was what a wild combo, decided to come together to plan a protest.
Okay.
So previous demonstrations focused on specifically police brutality against gay individuals.
Right.
Were rather small. So these demonstrations, when they happened, it was a few people. Basically, they were small because there was a risk of, if you were identified as being a part of it, that could lose you that could like get into the paper. Your name would be listed. That could lose your job, your family. Like there were so many kind of repercussions if you were associated with those movements, right? And so what Pride decided to do was to focus on police brutality as a whole to widen their audience and dampen the risk.
Okay.
So they're like, if we just focus on like the general police brutality, not specifically towards the gay community, we could include other groups into our demonstration.
Right. We can include the minorities that are getting unfairly treated and whatnot. Yeah.
Right. And like this is the middle of the 60s, right? Yeah. So we're in that civil rights movement, right? And so while the Black and Latino communities were skeptical to ally with the queer community due to religious and societal reasons, they found commonality in the anti-war movement and the recent increase in police brutality.
Oh.
So it was an issue larger than their personal feelings.
Yeah, so they were able to bring in the hippies too.
Exactly. So they kind of like really rallied people around, right? So leaders of all three groups decided to stage several protests throughout LA on February 11th, 1967.
Okay.
A distribution of flyers and the use of phone trees because they didn't want to get out, right? Like they were like, this needs to be like snap, it just happens. Like they can't, whatever, right? Were used to get the message out. The flyer headlines read, "Crisis, police lawlessness must be stopped." Headline. The call to action surrounded fighting against arbitrary arrests, illegal search and seizures, police perjury in courts, entrapment, and abuse of people's rights and dignity. So all of those things can really be attributed to anyone, right? And so these topics, of course, going beyond the gay community, so the straights were invited. That's my note. I read that word for word. So the protest started outside the Black Cat Tavern that day with a total of nearly 600 people in attendance.
Wow.
Yeah. So while the protest was met by squadrons of armed policemen, it was uneventful in the best way.
Yeah.
Right? So demonstrators were careful to adhere to all laws and ordinances to avoid illegitimate arrests, which is fucked up, but like good to plan, right?
You have to play the game.
Right. This included rushing to pick up any flyers thrown onto the ground so the police could not bust them for littering.
Yeah.
And they also made sure to continuously move up and down the block to avoid charges of loitering.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that fucked? Attendees included queer people, allies, 4 ministers, plain-clothed officers, and even the police sergeant who led the original raid.
Okay.
Right? I would kind of be like,
why are you here?
Why are you here? Right? So the raid and protest may have unfortunately found itself hidden behind the flashy and popular Stonewall or Pride parades, but make no mistake, without the ability to reach across communities and take inspiration from the Black civil rights movement of promoting self-empowerment, some of the gay rights liberation may have taken a lot longer to accomplish. And so that is the Black Cat Tavern riot.
Okay.
Riot, in quotes, uprising, incident, and the protest that followed.
Wow.
So again, like the protest, very, again, uneventful, but they got the word out, right? And it was such a huge protest. Like that was something that could not be ignored.
No, and especially since it spanned across several different communities. It was a much, like you said, it was just a much bigger deal.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So that is our first event.
Okay.
And now we go a little north.
Sure.
Still in Cali.
Oh.
To
Juneau, Alaska.
San Francisco, baby. Which I did really like super quick offset. I did see that San Francisco was a huge gay hub.
Sure.
Because during World War II, when men were charged with being homosexual in the military, they would then drop them in San Francisco.
Oh.
Yeah. So then you just had a bunch of gay men chilling in San Francisco. And there's obviously a lot more to that, but that's like the general gist. And I was just like, oh.
Yeah, because I always knew like San Francisco was a little bit more queer oriented, but I never knew why.
That's kind of why. Yeah. Isn't that kind of weird?
That's fun.
Yeah. I'll get into that.
What a random like
little thing.
Town to be like, yeah, we're gonna dump y'all here. I was like, I thought like you were gonna go really dark and be like, oh, they dropped them off like the internment camps that they kept the Japanese in.
No, I think it was just because it was quicker. I'm sure like in the beginning when we were fighting in Europe more, maybe some of that kind of went to New York, but like I think it
Yeah.
was just as we were later into the war and into Japan and kind of
Those islands,
the
yeah.
East, it was just quick to just jump over.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Okay.
All right. Well, let's go to San Fran.
San Fran.
Why
it
not?
is.
So this is the Compton's Cafeteria riot.
Okay.
This one, I still don't think it's a riot, but
Okay.
like there's more destruction, so
This
maybe.
one is definitely a riot.
This one gets fucking crazy. It does, but we'll get into it.
Cool.
So this is in August of 1966.
Perfect.
So Gene Compton's cafeteria in the Tenderloin district of San Francisco. You heard me. So I'll talk about it in a second.
I have so many questions already.
So this marked the beginning of transgender activism in San Francisco.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. Oh, all of a sudden, we're back on track.
Okay, well, I'm confused about a Tenderloin district.
I had no idea that this is an actual term.
Yeah.
So I'll get into it in a little bit, but it is like an actual term that describe a certain type of district or neighborhood.
Oh, okay. It's not like there's a flank steak borough in San Fran either.
Oh, there's a flank steak.
I don't even know what that means.
Exactly.
Go ahead.
So a little background.
Sure.
Cool. So we're going to get into a little bit of transgender background. We're going to get into a little bit of like why that was, I don't want to say popularized, but why that kind of had a bigger focus in San Francisco.
Okay.
Cool. So in 1952, Christine Jorgensen was one of the first trans women to undergo gender-affirming surgery in Denmark.
Oh.
This was, of course, a media sensation, and when she returned to the U.S., Jorgensen was an American a singer, actress, and trans activist. She really set the stage for kind of trans activism and trans, like the term of transgender really entering the mainstream and people knowing that this exists and these people exist.
Sure.
Cool. Because she was famous. Idea and perceptions of gender and trans people started to shift post this surgery and as we head into the 60s. More and more we saw gender norms and expressions being bent. So feminists stopped wearing bras and makeup. Men started to grow their hair long. Gender neutral fashion became more popular. And so that this kind of catalysts us into this sort of wave of society, especially amongst the youth. Right?
Everyone's wearing blue jeans.
While gender conforming laws were still in place, the popularity and ideals against them began to rise. So in 1966, endocrinologist Harry Benjamin, who had treated Jorgensen, published the book The Transsexual Phenomenon.
Okay.
Starting in the 50s, Benjamin had offered information, hormones, and gender-affirming surgeries to trans people. He even opened a practice in San Francisco near the Tenderloin neighborhood. Many of the trans people in the area and part of the riot received treatment from Benjamin. So he was very obviously active, very supportive, both in treatment and in just as a people, supporting them, right? The book legitimized trans people. This had finally woken people to the possibility of gender transition, as many members of the queer community were describing themselves as drag queens or transvestites. Not only to the public, but to the medical community.
Right.
So the book popularized the concept of medical transition as a way to treat trans patients. So it kind of sounds malicious at first, like it's a mental disorder, and that kind of was the thought of the time, right? But I kind of took it more so that he was saying like there are people that are coming to you and saying like I'm not in the right body, right? And that has so many implications mentally, physically, things like that. And he's like, the way you treat that, quote unquote, right, is by helping them transition to who they are, right?
Right.
And so that means gender affirming care, that means surgeries if they'd like that means all of these things, and that was all put into this book, which was crazy for 1966.
That's okay,
right? It's crazy when you pool some of these things. I mean, even when you talked about like Sarah Josephine Barker, right? Like Baker. Sorry, thank you. There are some things that you see that and you're just like, oh, someone had to create that. Someone had to bring that to us.
It's common knowledge for us today,
right?
But it had to start somewhere,
right? And that's what we're here to uncover.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That is this podcast. So, it popularized the concept of medical transition as a way to treat trans patients. Several universities began to open gender clinics. Funding was often received from a wealthy trans man, Reed Erickson, who had helped establish the Erickson Educational Foundation. So by the late 60s, Johns Hopkins University was even making plans to offer medical transition surgeries.
No way.
And I think what happens is that you start this in like the late 60s, it starts to get into the 70s, and then you get into the 80s where Reagan now has power across the nation.
Right.
And then you have not only the AIDS epidemic, but you kind of have this religious awakening and satanic, like all of these things. And so it kind of, unfortunately, obviously halts at a whole all of this progress.
All the progress, yeah.
So while this was an amazing step forward, it wasn't a cure, quote unquote, to the socioeconomic issues and intense discrimination trans people still faced at the time and in years today. So let's talk about the Tenderloin District.
Yeah. What's up with that? I need to know.
I know that's been like just sitting there the whole.
That's all I can focus on.
A book.
Yeah, sure, great.
We get it. Yeah. So
things are going great for trans people. Okay, whatever. Reagan sucks. Talk about pork tenderloin.
I just need to know.
I'm a Midwest boy. I can only focus on pork tenderloin.
Breaded pork tenderloin. As we know,
yes,
tenderloin, as it refers to meat,
delicious.
We know that,
yes.
Right?
Oh God,
but
I'm so hungry.
Starved. But there's also the informal definition as it refers to a, quote, a district of a city where vice and corruption are prominent.
No way.
I didn't know that.
Neither did I.
So this term started in New York to reference a district characterized by corrupt police that will, quote, protect and not report illegal activities in exchange for money.
Oh.
So I was like, that feels very like mafia-esque.
Yeah, it's interesting that they picked Tenderloin to like
right
mark like, oh, this is a corrupt police district.
Yeah, I'm not sure kind of why, but that kind of colloquially became.
Is it because like cops are pigs, and so then like,
well, a tenderloin comes from a cow, but
not a pork tenderloin.
Oh, sure.
That's the one I've been talking about.
I'm so sorry. Sorry. True, maybe, but I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I just know that. Do you want me to research it?
No, just continue with your story.
Okay, thank you. So San Francisco's tea district.
Okay.
No? Okay.
I'm not interested in tea.
Oh, sorry. And San Francisco's Tenderloin district had always been inhabited by traditionally marginalized peoples.
Oh, you weren't listing a new district. You were just shortening.
Yeah, to be like fun and cool.
Oh, okay. Well.
Okay. Didn't really land well.
No, I'm too distracted by the pork.
We got a little bit to go here, buddy. So I'm going to need you to rein it in.
All right, focus.
So by the start of the 60s, so the Tenderloin district had always been inhabited by traditionally marginalized peoples. By the start of the 60s, we have the idea of... I forgot I wrote this. At the start of the 60s, we have the idea of stupid urban renewal hitting San Francisco, especially the North Beach and South of Market neighborhoods along the waterfront.
Stupid urban renewal.
Well, because here's the thing. This is... In context, I was an urban planning major, and so this was frustrating, right? Like, because urban renewal in itself is like kind of taking public spaces and making them beautiful. Yeah. It's kind of like a beautification project, right? Yeah. Or like trying to revitalize areas within urban settings, right? Which is fantastic. However, done poorly, you get into gentrification and you start to push out marginal groups. You get into segregation. Like there's all of these things because we didn't have progressive mindsets at the time. They were like, I just want this to look pretty.
Right.
So push everyone the fuck out, demolish it all, and rebuild. And that's why we have disgusting buildings from the 60s. I hate that architecture. So that's why I say stupid urban renewal. The idea itself, awesome. The way that it was enacted, horrible.
Yeah.
Horrible. So so off of North Beach and south of Market neighborhoods along the waterfront.
Yeah.
So at the time, these neighborhoods were visibly gay. Working class areas.
Yeah.
But intense policing and targeted redevelopment pushed residents out and forced them to relocate, many ending up in the Tenderloin district.
Okay.
So initially the Tenderloin district was kind of more working class, marginalized people.
Right.
Not necessarily like gay centric, but because they were redeveloping the North Beach and south of Market neighborhoods, it pushed a lot of people into the Tenderloin district.
Yeah.
So because it was directly adjacent to south of Market and like a few blocks away from North Beach.
Sure.
So this shifted the area into one now made up largely of queer and trans people. While there were a few gay bars in the district already, more grew as the population, of course, grew.
Of course, right? The market calls for it.
You might be asking, but what about the famously gay Castro district in San Francisco?
You know, that's been on my mind.
You were thinking about it. I knew it. Well, that had become reserved for kind of white gay men who forced out trans people because they unfortunately attracted more police attention due to those pesky gender affirming laws.
Right.
Not condoning, just explaining. Right. Which again, of course, is a huge, and it's really frustrating. And I know many people have gone into this tangent, but it's like gay men are like, we are the face and we helped gay liberation and all these things. And then you go into all of these undiscovered or hidden kind of incidents and events, and you go, got it. Trans person of color, another trans person, drag queen, like all of the lesbian, like all of these people. Not to say that gay men didn't have the kind of a part in gay liberation, and a lot of times they're able to vocalize more because they were unfortunately seen by society and taken more seriously by society.
Well, especially like the white gay, like the white men of the gay community. It was like, oh, well,
because they could kind of infiltrate, right? Like, as unfortunate as that is, but all of these catalysts and all of these push forwards were done by trans people and by, of course, trans people of color, because they're like, no, fuck you. Like, 18 of my friends were just beaten to death by police. Like, I don't get to just like sit in a corner and hide and pretend to be straight because I'm a gay man. You know what I mean? And so that's where that gets really frustrating when gay men are like, oh, trans people. And you're just like, shut the like, you wouldn't be and have the same rights you have today if it wasn't for them. Yeah. So shut the fuck up, sit down and say thank you. That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, thank you. So, many trans people and drag queens turned to sex work or hustling in order to just survive. Yeah. So, kind of playing into what we just said, due to job discrimination and systemic marginalization, they ended up giving up on trying to find kind of employment and turn to sex work. So, I have a note that says some fortunate trans people were able to find employment, such as singers and dancers, because they could, quote, pass as cisgender in society. Right. So, unfortunately, sex work, of course, is riddled with an air of constant danger. Sex workers face police harassment, abuse by their clients, discrimination from bars and clubs, and, of course, murder. When bars,
the big one.
The big one. When bars and clubs pushed these workers out, since their work was illegal and could draw a police raid at any moment, they had to turn to picking up clients on the street. This, of course, being far more dangerous. There was even a serial killer that targeted, mutilated, and killed trans women sex workers in the Tenderloin district.
Gee.
Yeah. Trans women were considered sick and mentally disturbed. Most people did not care whether they lived or died, which only prolonged the danger. So that is some context there. I'm filled with context today. So we're going to talk a little bit about Compton's cafeteria. Sure. And then we kind of get into the event.
Okay.
So Compton's cafeteria, this was a chain of 24-hour cafeterias or kind of diners. They're called cafeterias. Owned by Gene, 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 Compton in San Francisco from the 1940s to the 70s. Oh. So the location that we talk about is at Taylor and Turk, opened in 1954 and became a meeting place and safe haven for trans women and queens living and working in the Tenderloin.
Okay.
So while the community saw it as safe, especially since they were unwelcome in gay bars, the workers there still, of course, were discriminatory and did not want them inside. So while they were like, oh, this place we can kind of settle and regroup and join and all those things, we're safe here. Yeah. The workers there were like, can you get the fuck out? Yeah. Like, we're still kind of harassing and being discriminatory, right? So by the summer of 1966, the management at the Comptons in the Tenderloin had become impatient with queer customers, claiming they were bad for business and that they wouldn't purchase anything. So management would typically call police to clear them out. Oh. Now, I will say, like, not great that you're not buying anything. Yeah. Get it because you don't have money. So, like, I see that side of it, but, like, you don't have to harass people. No. And also, like, if no one's bothered, and plus it's, like, 2 or 3 in the morning. Right. Like, who else is just, like, hanging out? You know? Like, let them be. Yeah. Anyway. So, oftentimes, police would come, whether called by Comptons or not, and harass and or arrest these trans women for a crime of, quote, female impersonation.
Okay.
Correct. Something as small as having your shirt buttons on the wrong side could get you arrested for cross-dressing.
Wow.
The law wasn't repealed until 1974.
Wow. That's
right?
late.
Mm-hmm. So, July 19th, 1966, Vanguard had enough and picketed Compton's in response to the cafeteria's discriminatory practices and police harassment of trans people.
Yeah.
This was one of the first demonstrations against police violence directed towards trans people in San Francisco. Vanguard was a social and political pressure group formed in 1965 by queer youth, many trans and sex workers, and was the first known queer youth organization in the U.S.
Oh,
Yeah.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. So the local newspaper covered the picket. Sorry. The local newspaper covered the picket with the title, quote, "Young Homos Picket Comptons," end quote.
Okay.
I was like, it's not even correct.
No.
But kind of a funny title. I'm not going to lie. So while the picket was unsuccessful, it definitely set the mindset that fueled the riot a few weeks later.
Yeah.
Eric Stanley says, quote, "The issues facing gay and transgender youth in the 60s produced radical insights into the connections between economic class, police violence, incarceration, and homophobia," end quote. Mm-hmm. Now, the uprising. I'm not going to call it a riot anymore. Uprising. Rebellion. Fight back.
Yeah.
Instant. Okay. Saturday night, August. Some evidence suggests the 27th. We're not quite sure.
Okay.
Of 1966. The contention between Compton management and trans customers
We
continued.
don't know the day?
We don't know the date.
Interesting.
A lot of police records from the 60s destroyed. Like, don't exist anymore. So we don't know. So again, you kind of go off of news articles.
Right.
But like news articles will be like, on a Saturday in August. You know what I mean? Or
Yeah.
you go off of kind of oral history.
Right.
So Saturday night, August. Some evidence suggests the 27th. 1966. That's okay. Just kidding. The contention between Compton management and trans customers continued to bubble. The restaurant even implementing a service fee, which was directed at the group.
Oh.
So they're like, fine, you're not going to pay anything? You have to. It's
Yeah.
a service fee.
Yeah.
That was their attempt, I guess. As management attempted to harass the trans women to get them to leave, they called the police once again to clear them out. The staff had told the police department that the trans customers had become a ruckus.
Oh.
So I say that because I think that kind of already sets the tone for the police entering the space, right?
Right,
Because
they're
if you
ready to
called,
fight.
right, if you called and you were like, "Hey, we have some, transgender people here. Can you come clear them out?" That's one thing. But be
Right.
like, "They're causing a ruckus," and then people
They're
are
being
like,
unruly.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. So when police arrived at Compton's, they asked for IDs and began their typical harassment of the women. Mm-hmm. When one of the officers grabbed and attempted to arrest a trans woman, she had enough and threw a cup of coffee directly in his face.
Oh.
Right. I was like, okay. That's like, yes, deserved, get it. And also, that's hot.
Yeah.
That's hot.
Yeah.
So, but like, okay, yep. So from here, the cafeteria absolutely erupted.
Right.
Fellow
now
community,
they're causing a ruckus.
Now it's you want to talk about a ruckus? Flip a table. Fellow community members began to throw chairs, tables, sugar shakers, and dinerware at the police.
Not the sugar shakers.
Not the sugar shakers. They even began to throw them at their surroundings, causing all of the windows to shatter.
Oh, wow.
And it's like a corner lot that is all windows.
Yeah.
So as the women were being arrested inside Compton's, they began to fight back more, hitting officers with their heavy purses and even beating them with their high heels. Which, remember, like, most of the times these purses might carry like all of their belongings, a lot of their belongings, because they might be staying over something. You know what I mean? Like, there's a lot in there, and just like whacking them.
Yeah.
Right. So police retreated into the streets to request backup, and the fighting continued. Other customers of Compton's, like that were not a part of the group, had barricaded themselves in the restaurant.
Wow.
When everyone else spilled out into the street, eventually escaping out the back into the alley.
Yeah.
So more queens and trans women, hearing the news spread, arrived and participated in the resistance. So
Jeez.
I like to think there was like a Paul Revere moment, like one person just like running to all the gay bars in the neighborhood, like ringing a bell. Yeah. More queens and trans women, hearing the news spread, arrived and participated in the resistance. They destroyed a police car in the chaos and even burned down a newsstand.
Wow.
Of course, from here, the police began to fight back. The riot and fighting lasted hours, ending with police arresting as many people as they could and loaded them into the police van.
Jeez.
right? Elliot Blackston, a former San Francisco police officer at the time, said that that night, quote, there was unnecessary violence, end quote, from cops at Compton's. Because, of course.
Right.
Felicia Flames Elizondo.
What a name.
What a name. I love that she went by Flames. I'm like, hell yeah. A trans rights activist states, quote, we were tired of being treated like garbage. We decided we weren't going to take it anymore. And I think that's the important thing about the Compton's cafeteria riot, that we all got together and said, we have rights too, end quote. So from here, this marked a turning point in LGBTQ plus civil rights movement and had a hugely positive impact.
Yeah.
This inspired activists to begin organizing to protect trans rights. And 1 month after the riot, trans activists and allies picketed Compton's once again in protest.
Okay.
One of the leading policemen in the area advocated on behalf of the community.
Oh.
And together with pressure from activists, San Francisco's first transgendered advocacy group, the National Transsexual Counseling Unit, or NTCU, was formed to help set up programs to help trans people get jobs, education, and live their lives.
No way.
When I first pulled from this quote, it said live normal lives, and I hate that.
Oh.
So I just said live their lives.
Yeah, that's fair.
So I'm like,
that's
why?
Better.
You know what I mean? Like, why does it? Anyway, financial support from the Erickson Educational Foundation also supported the NTCU.
Oh.
Yeah. In early autumn, Vanguard, that socio-political group, hosted a historic street sweep in response to the Compton's events. Vanguard members took to the streets of the Tenderloin with push brooms borrowed from the city for a community project called Fall Cleanup. The event was to protest the routine practice of police sweeping the streets of known queer neighborhoods to remove all the queer people. So that practice was called sweeping. Quote, all trash is before the broom was their slogan, pushed against the idea that they, as people, weren't in any way disposable or unworthy of human dignity.
Yeah.
So this symbolically called into question the fact that police were treating transgender and queer sex workers like trash to be swept away and instead reclaimed public space as their own. So the Tenderloin continues to have a reputation in California as being a magnet for homelessness, drug use, and crime, with some calling it a, quote, contaminant zone.
Oh,
disgusting.
God.
For
That's
illegal,
terrible.
Right? For illegal activity.
I'm surprised it's still around.
It is.
Yeah.
So I am actually going to tell you kind of what it's like today.
Oh, good.
So the tech boom actually also hasn't helped because it's exacerbating income inequality.
Yeah.
Right. So the Tenderloin is one of the rare areas that has maintained some affordable housing in the heart of the city, where low-income trans people of color continue to live and gather. So local organizers began discussing the creation of a historic district as a way to fight gentrification. So a real estate developer unfortunately had gained approval from the city to tear down numerous historic LGBT sites to build a residential and hotel project.
Okay.
So they're like, fuck. So activists opposed the destruction of landmarks, but were unable to stop the demolition and development. However, a group led by Black trans women were able to secure funding from the developer for community services, and in 2017, the official creation of the district, titled the Compton Transgender Cultural District, which covers 6 blocks, is considered the first legally recognized trans district in the world.
No way.
Isn't that cool?
Interesting, yeah.
I was like, that's awesome. To like come out of that, like you started where people, like trans people, were forced to this area, sex work, low income, all of these things, like trying to find a safe haven, and now that spot, because they were able to catalyst and fight against police brutality and laws and all of those things, they have their own district to call their home.
That's crazy.
It's crazy. It's awesome. So the founders are Honey Mahogany, Janetta Johnson, and Aria Said.
Okay.
So as of 2020, it has been renamed the Transgender District. And I kind of like that more because I think it really takes Compton's out of it, because Compton's wasn't a supporter.
No.
They were just like tolerated,
was the incident,
but they're the ones that created everything, right? So I'm like, I get why it was initially included, because that was kind of the catalyst into a lot of these things.
Right.
And however, like, let them move on from that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it was renamed the Transgender District. So Aria Saeed, the co-founder and executive director of the district, who moved from Oregon to San Francisco when she was 19 years old and wound up homeless in the Tenderloin, stated, quote, "We can create a world where we are economically and culturally and socially empowered," end quote. So long-term, community builders look to turn the district into a hub of services and opportunities for trans people with more community space, housing, job training, and businesses, quote, "owned and operated by and for trans people,"
Oh, yeah.
end quote. So lastly, you can go watch Susan Stryker's documentary Screaming Queens, which uncovered the uprising alongside the defiant voices that were there.
Oh, that's awesome.
She's the one that found like a little snippet that referenced this incident and then just dug and dug and dug and dug. And like all of this information was coming from people in the area, from a couple other news clips, but she's the one that really found this event. And then she made a documentary about it.
That's cool.
It's awesome. So yeah, you can go today, visit, the Transgender District in San Fran, and then to remember where all of this catalyst has come from. So I appreciate you sticking around.
Yeah.
I really just wanted to bring a lot of, kind of as I said in the beginning of my last episode, I really wanted to bring a lot of stories that have been uncovered as of late and really hidden by these more popularized events to light.
Yeah,
because
for sure.
These are the stepping stones into what we have today, right? And so I just think it's important not only for, of course, the queer community, but everyone to understand, like, there are, resistance fights. It wasn't just like an instant and then we got all of our rights. Like, that's not what happened, right? But unfortunately, like, it just wasn't covered and it wasn't, really written down. And from that point to now, a lot of things, unfortunately, are found through police records. And then those records are destroyed. So it's a whole cycle, but...
And falsified,
yeah. Right? Of course. And so while a lot of the stories that are to come that I might center around kind of the queer community, some of them might be more oral tradition based. It's only because we've lost documentation or it just wasn't there.
Yeah.
And so I hope to share that. And I think it'll be really exciting to be able to bring that to a better light and an audience to be able to hear these stories.
A new generation.
Right. And I hope people take these stories and go even further with them, right? Like, let this be your own catalyst into something. But
make your own documentary.
Yeah, baby. So thank you all for sticking around. I really appreciate it. Subscribe. I hate saying that after I just talked about this, but that helps us spread these types of stories to a wider audience. So go ahead and do that. You can find us on every social media platform, WDYK_podcast. And that's all I got for you.
Hey, this is a great story. Thanks for bringing all these front and center.
Yeah. Thanks, Dev.
Appreciate it.
I'll see you next week.
Okay, bye.
Okay, bye.